Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the cold stone hush of Westminster Abbey. And trust me, it's not your average wedding. You can feel the chill in the air the moment you enter, the kind that makes your breath curl into mist like a secret you're not supposed to tell. The long nave stretches ahead, lined with flickering candles that cast ripples of gold across carved suns and stern-faced kings frozen in stone. Outside, London smells of damp wool and wood smoke. Inside, it smells of beeswax, incense, and a little bit of scandal. Because here's the thing, you're about to watch a king marry a child, and not just any king. Richard II of England, 29 years old, in shimmering cloth of gold, hair catching the filtered light like spun wheat. He's standing at the altar, gloved hands steady. And beside him, a girl so small her head barely clears his elbow, her crown seeming heavier than her whole frame. This is Isabella of Valois, 6 years old, daughter of the King of France. You probably wouldn't survive this court without a thick skin and a quick bow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, comment below and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I find it kind of magical that we're exploring these strange, ancient moments together from different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing near the altar rail, prayer book clutched in your hands, watching servants scurry to their appointed stations. The courteous whispers ripple like wind through reeds, half curiosity, half disbelief. In your lifetime you've seen brides as young as 12 or 13, sure, but never someone who still needs a stall to reach the feasting table. Yet, here she is, draped in French silk, pearls braided into dark hair, expression more curious than afraid. Richard bends to speak his vows, his voice gentle, almost protective, not the voice of a man seeking gratification, but of one fulfilling a duty. Everyone in this abbey knows the marriage won't be consummated until she comes of age. It's the treaty that matters. This is about securing peace with France, stitching two kingdoms together after decades of war. Kings marry for alliances, not affection. And sometimes the chess pieces are still in the nursery. Historians still argue whether Richard's choice was driven more by political necessity or personal sentiment. Some say he saw in her a way to bind France's loyalty. Others whisper that her miniature portrait softened something in him. A man left childless and lonely after the plague took his beloved and of Bohemia. Whatever the truth, this day marks a turning point. The vows are spoken. You murmur the blessing, the incense curling between you and the couple like a silk ribbon. The organ swells, the doors open, and light floods the aisle. People lean in, craning for a glimpse of England's new queen, this slip of a girl whose tiny hand disappears entirely inside the king's. Outside, the bells ring in celebration. Inside, your heartbeat slows, but your mind lingers on one unsettling thought. In the grand game of royal politics, pawns rarely choose their own moves. And you can't help but wonder how many moves ahead her opponents are already thinking. You leave the echo of the bells behind and step, in your mind's eye, far from Westminster across the Channel, to the heart of Paris, years earlier. The Louvre Palace isn't yet a museum. It's a fortress of politics and perfume, where tapestries ripple in drafty corridors and the smell of roasting meats mixes with rose water from silver basins. It's November 9th, 1389, and a newborn princess has just been placed into a carved cradle lined with ermine. This is Isabella of Valois, the first daughter of King Charles VI of France and Queen Isabella of Bavaria. For a moment, all is calm. But this is a court that lives in cycles of splendor and shadow. Her father, Charles, is handsome, regal, and when the madness takes him, terrifying. There are days when he strides into council with clarity and poise, issuing decrees that strengthen France's position in the war. And then there are the other days when he forgets who he is, insists his body is made of glass, and refuses to bathe 4 months because he's certain water will shatter him. Servants tiptoe, messengers vanish into side passages, and the royal children are whisked away to safer rooms. Imagine being a toddler, one day bounced on a laughing king's knee, and the next finding that same man staring through you, if you're a stranger sent to kill him. Those memories press into Isabella's earliest understanding of power, that it can be dazzling, and it can be dangerous. Her mother, Queen Isabeau, is no passive consort. She's politically shrewd, a diplomat in silk gowns, and she looks at her daughter not just with maternal pride, but with calculation. In her mind, every child is a thread in France's web of alliances. A royal daughter is a bargaining chip of immense value. Historians still argue whether Isabeau's maneuvering was cold-blooded ambition or the only way to keep France stable during Charles's breakdowns. Either way, she raises Isabella knowing that her beauty and lineage will someday be bartered for peace or power. The palace is a paradox for a child, dual bright halls and dangerous undercurrents. Musicians play in the great chambers, poets recite romances. But outside, France groans under the weight of the 100 Years' War fields burned, villages raided, peasants taxed until their nails break in the soil. Even the thick walls of the Louvre can't shut out the smell of smoke carried in on the wind. One winter night, as frost whitens the courtyard stones, little Isabella listens to her nurse tell a fairy tale by the hearth. But she also hears the muffled argument of councillors. In the next room, voices sharp over the crackle of fire. Words like treaty, truce, and dowry mingle with her dreams, planting seeds she won't understand until much later. A quirky detail the chroniclers note: Isabella's earliest dresses were sewn with hidden pockets not for sweets or toys, but for talismans, tiny religious medals, sprigs of herbs, even a scrap of parchment with a saint's name, slipped there by her superstitious attendants to ward off her father's bad humours. Royalty might command armies, but they still clung to charms. Like any market woman, you watch her grow in this environment, a blend of pageantry and paranoia. She learns to curtsy before she can write her name, to sit still while a lady braids her hair for hours, to smile at foreign envoys even when she doesn't know their language. By the time she's 6, she already understands that her life will be spent in service to France, not in the kitchens or the fields, but in the marriage bed of some king or prince who needs her bloodline more than her company. And when the offer comes from across the sea, carried by men in fur-lined cloaks with the damp smell of English weather still on them, her mother listens intently. The girl is too young to know the stakes, but the Queen knows this match could redraw the map of Europe. You stay in the Louvre's shadow, but your gaze widens now, spanning the map of Europe like the parchment charts unrolled on a royal clerk's table. It's the 1390s, and England and France are like two exhausted fighters, circling each other. After 60 years of the 100 Years' War, the war began over English claims to the French throne, but by now it's mutated into something bigger: national pride, trade dominance, and the tangle of old grudges that nobody quite remembers. The origin of Yet nobody dares forget. France has suffered raids that leave whole villages blackened to ash. England's nobles have emptied their coffers funding campaigns across the Channel. Farmers on both sides groan under new taxes. Merchants complain about disrupted trade. And even knights mutter about peace, as if it's a fine wine they've only heard of but never tasted. Historians still argue whether the war could have burned itself out without this marriage, or if her symbolic gesture was the only way to stop the bloodletting. But everyone agrees that by the mid-1390s, both courts were at least willing to pretend they wanted peace. You can picture the English envoys arriving in Paris, all men with weathered faces from years of campaigning, now in velvet doublets instead of armour. They bow to Queen Isabeau, exchange careful words with French councillors, and finally mention the idea that's been brewing since 1395. A marriage between Isabella and King Richard II. Richard is a widower now, his first wife, and of Bohemia beloved by the English for her kindness, died of plague the year before. By all accounts, their union was unusually affectionate for a royal match. Some say Richard wandered the halls in grief, refusing to eat. In the great hall, surrounding himself with Anne's possessions, the thought of replacing her must have felt like treason to his own heart. But a king's personal grief is a luxury. The kingdom's needs come first. And England needs an heir. Here's the hook for the French. They don't just offer a daughter. They dangle a dowry of 800,000 francs, an astronomical sum, enough to refill England's war-drained treasury and perhaps quiet a few grumbling barons. And they promise something even rarer, a 28-year truce. That's not just a ceasefire. That's an entire generation growing up without seeing an English longbow aimed at a French village. There's a catch, of course several. In fact, the girl is only 6. Even in the Middle Ages, this is considered unusually young for a bride. Most noble matches wait until the girl is at least approaching adolescence, old enough to begin her training as consort. But French negotiators argue this is exactly why it will work. A child bride, they say, is a blank slate. Raised in England, she will learn its customs, its courtly manners, even its loyalties. By the time she's old enough to share a bed with Richard, she be as English in heart as she's French by blood. It's a living symbol of reconciliation. The two nations twine together in one queen's body. Some English councillors nod at the idea. Others mutter about scandal, about how their rivals might sneer at a king marrying a child. And yet there's that dowry, there's that truce, and there's the quiet reality that Richard, still in the bloom of youth, could wait for her to come of age while securing his borders in the meantime. You can almost see the negotiations stretching over months, envoys crossing the channel with sealed letters, gifts, and new conditions. Every clause is debated, which servants she may bring, whether she may write home in French, the exact wording of the clause forbidding consummation until she reaches physical maturity. Meanwhile, in the royal nursery in Paris, Isabella is learning her first English phrases from a hired tutor. She giggles over the strange sounds, not knowing she's rehearsing the language of her future subjects. The seamstresses are already working on a trousseau fit for a queen, and in the back of every diplomat's mind is the same hope, that this match will do what swords and treaties never quite could: turn enemies into in-laws, and in-laws into peacekeepers. Whether it will last, well, that's the question they choose not to ask too loudly. You're back in the echoing chambers of diplomacy now, where peace isn't declared with a handshake. It's crafted in sentences so dense with clauses they could choke a scribe. The proposal has been accepted in principle, but the real work is in the details, and that means parchment, ink, and more candle wax than a cathedral can spare. The English and French delegations circle each other like wary cats. They agree on the broad strokes. Isabella will marry Richard II. She will cross the channel with dignity, and the marriage will not be consummated until she is physically mature. But every comma matters. Every word could be twisted later by someone looking for a loophole. One mainstream fact the chroniclers preserve: Isabella will be allowed to keep her French household maids, tutors, and a few older ladies in waiting loyal to her mother. This ensures she doesn't feel entirely adrift in a foreign court, but it also keeps a French presence in Richard's inner circle, a subtle way to maintain influence. Then there's the matter of correspondence. The French insist she must be able to write home freely. The English agree, but with the unspoken understanding that every letter will be read before it's sent. Trust is good, control is better. The dowry is fixed at 800,000 francs, payable in installments. And there's that golden promise, a 28-year truce, written in such a way that breaking it would make either side look like a villain before all of Christendom. Historians still argue whether the sum or the truce was the bigger prize for Richard: money to soothe his fractious nobility, or peace to shore up his reputation as a statesman. While the diplomats haggle, the practical preparations unfold in Paris. Seamstresses work by lamplight, sewing gowns of cloth of gold so heavy that a grown woman would need help to walk in them, never mind a girl of 6. Embroiderers add English roses alongside French fleur-de-lis, a motif that looks harmonious in silk thread, even if it's harder to achieve in politics. There's a fringe detail here that's almost a charming. Isabella's tutors invent a game to teach her English court etiquette. They play at coronation, with one child acting as king, others as nobles, and Isabella practicing curtsies and the proper way to accept a goblet. Somewhere in this play is the faintest rehearsal for her real future. You can almost hear her asking her nurse, "Will the king be kind?" And the nurse, with the tact of a lifelong servant, replies, "He will be exactly what France needs him to be, my lady." Meanwhile, in Westminster, Richard's council debates whether this is worth the risk. Some fear ridicule from their own peers. Others point out that a truce buys breathing space to deal with Scotland and Ireland troublesome neighbours with a knack for exploiting English distraction. At last, the treaties are written, the seals impressed, and the wax cold. The ink is barely dry when the news begins to spread, not in proclamations, but in the quieter channels of noble gossip. A child queen is coming to England. She will not just wear a crown, she will carry the fragile hope of a continent. And you can't help thinking, as you watch the wax harden around those red ribbons, that the real ceremony has already happened here. In these council chambers, the altar will be just for show. The vows have been spoken in the language of politics, and they are binding in a way no priest can match. The Channel wind bites harder than any court whisper. You're in Calais now, October 31st, 1386, where English guards in polished armour stand shoulder to shoulder with French men at arms, each side pretending the other doesn't make them, each for a sword. Calais is an English-held port on French soil, the perfect halfway point for a halfway unusual wedding. Inside Calais Castle, the hall is hung with banners that try their best to blend two centuries of rivalry into one harmonious tapestry. English roses nod awkwardly beside French fleur-de-lis. The smell is a mix of beeswax, damp stone, and that particular tang of sea air that clings to everyone's clothes. Isabella is 7 now, but in a gown of cloth of gold, so heavy with pearls and embroidery that she needs help to take each step. Imagine a child carrying the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders and an actual dress that could double as a siege engine. When she reaches the dais, Richard kneels so his eyes meet hers, exchanging rings with the care of a man handling spun glass. This first ceremony is small by royal standards: envoys, high-ranking nobles, a few carefully chosen witnesses from both sides. There are no cheering crowds, no jostling commoners. Just a quiet hum of political history being inked into the margins. The vows are spoken, hands joined, blessings given. Then, with a formality almost at odds with the bride's tiny stature, the union is declared. Historians still argue whether Richard's gentle demeanour that day was genuine paternal warmth or calculated theatre for the French. Either way, it's noted how he lifts her chin when she flinches under the stares of so many armoured men. A year later, you're in London, and subtlety has been thrown out the stained glass window. Westminster Abbey gleams, its arches soaring high enough to make even the most jaded courtier glance upward. Outside, the streets are a crush of people, Londoners eager to see the famous child queen. Some climb onto barrels, others perch in windows. The crowd surges so hard that rumour says several people die in the press to get a better view. The coronation procession winds through the city like a river of colour. Isabella rides in a litter draped with English roses and French fleur-de-lis, the symbols stitched together as though needlework could achieve what swords never did. Her crown has been specially made for her small head, a glittering circlet that still looks just a little too big. English duchesses carry her train, both chaperons and political chaperon in the abbey. The air is thick with incense and expectation. The choir's voices climb into the rafters as the anointing oil is dabbed on her forehead. Her smile is careful, learned in the mirror, because she's only beginning to understand the English words being spoken around her. The coronation feast lasts 3 days. Minstrels sing of peace between England and France, jugglers toss knives. Under the watchful eyes of guards, actors perform allegories in which the crowned figures embrace, while a dragon labeled war slinks away. The wine flows freely for the adults. The child queen nibbles at sugared almonds, hands folded just as her tutors taught her. A quirky detail from the chroniclers: among the entertainments is a trained bear, brought from the tower's menagerie, which dances clumsily to a drum. The crowd roars with laughter, and Isabella's face lights up the most unguarded smile she's shown all day. And yet, as you glance around the high table, you notice some of the older nobles, watching the scene with calculating eyes. Peace is a delicate thing, and not everyone here is eager for it to last. The feast may be loud, but beneath it runs a current of silence, the unspoken question of how long before someone upends the table. The glitter of coronation fades into the patterned rhythm of court life, and now you walk the long corridors of Westminster Palace alongside England's youngest queen. Her apartments are tucked within the sprawling complex rooms of carved oak and tapestry walls, their colours muted by London's damp air. Outside, the Thames laps at the palace wharf, carrying barges loaded with firewood, barrels of wine, and messages sealed with wax. Richard has been deliberate in creating a household for Isabella. It's a careful blend of English and French attendants, a political statement disguised as hospitality. French ladies in waiting, sent by her mother, teach her the refinements of Parisian etiquette: how to tilt a fan to hide a smile, how to step from a litter without showing her ankles. English tutors introduce her to the language of her new kingdom, its sun's days, and the small but crucial differences in manners: how deep to curtsy to a duke versus an earl, and why one should never, ever praise French wine within earshot of an English vintner. Richard himself takes an active interest in her upbringing. He visits her chambers regularly, bringing gifts from his travels: a saucer illuminated with gold leaf, a tiny harp strung with silver wire, a carved ivory box filled with sugared violets. He seems to enjoy these visits, speaking to her in slow, clear English, repeating words until she can mimic them without a French accent. Historians still debate whether this was a paternal instinct or a calculated investment in shaping a future queen who would feel loyalty to England above all else. Her days begin with the chiming of the palace bells, lessons in reading and writing both in French and the increasingly familiar English are followed by instruction in music, embroidery, and the complex geography of the English court. She learns to identify each great noble by their coat of arms, and to remember who supports the king and who merely tolerates him. There's a quirky note in one contemporary account: Isabella's pet was not a lapdog, as might be expected, but a small green parrot given to her by Richard. The bird, apparently fond of mimicry, learned to squawk "God save the king" in a voice that startled visitors and delighted the queen. Meals are taken in a small private hall, where dishes are as much lesson as sustenance. She's encouraged to try English pottage and roast beef, though her French palate still prefers delicate pastries and almond cream. Richard sometimes joins her, and during these shared meals, she begins to feel the faint outlines of a familial bond, strange in a marriage, perhaps, but comforting in a foreign land. Outside her chambers, the political climate is less comfortable. Courtiers exchange tight smiles in the king's presence and sharper words behind his back. Isabella hears names repeated: Lancaster, Gloucester. Arundel learns that each comes with its own history of loyalty or rebellion. Even at her age, she understands that the grand tapestries and gold plate are only part of the palace. The rest is built from alliances, favours, and debts. In quieter moments, she wanders the palace gardens, where the clipped hedges offer pockets of privacy. Here, she practices her English letters with a stick in the dirt, or sits beneath the bare branches in winter, listening to the gulls cry over the river. The gardens smell of damp earth and rosemary, and for a few minutes, she can be just a girl again, not a living treaty wrapped in velvet. And yet, even in these moments, the weight of her role never entirely leaves. Every lesson, every public appearance, every polite conversation with a noble, another stitch the tapestry She's expected to complete a tapestry large enough to hold a peace between two kingdoms. Whether it will last, she cannot know. But she's learning the skills to make herself indispensable if it begins to fray. You notice her circle beginning to take shape, girls in silks and velvets, most of them daughters of Richard's allies, all carefully chosen to be companions who might also serve as political buffers. Among them, one figure stands out, Margaret, Holland, 2 years older, with a quick wit and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly where she stands in the tangled family tree of England's nobility. Margaret becomes Isabella's guide to the subtler arts of survival. She teaches her the unspoken rules, how long to hold another lady's gaze without it becoming a challenge, which nobles will smile to your face and sharpen knives behind your back, why the safest answer to most questions is a gracious non-answer, that to spend hours together over needlework in the Queen's private garden, their fingers busy with embroidery, while their voices weave through gossip and genealogy. Why, Isabella once asks, do the nobles watch each other so carefully? Margaret's reply is patient, almost rehearsed. Richard's reign has been shadowed by unrest since he was a boy. Some great lords think he's too generous to his favourites. Others resent his willingness to negotiate with France instead of pressing the war. The peace their marriage represents is seen by some as wisdom and by others as weakness. It's here you see Isabella beginning to collect political knowledge like others collect charms. She learns that titles and land are not the only measures of power. Information is a currency all its own. Historians still argue whether her quick grasp of these dynamics came from natural intelligence or from necessity. But either way, she begins to look at courts with new eyes. One quirky detail from the period: Isabella and Margaret occasionally disguise themselves as kitchen maids, an escapade tolerated only because they never actually leave palace grounds. They wander through the less polished parts of Westminster, listening to the cooks complain about meat shortages, or the laundresses discuss which lords drink too much. For Isabella, it's a rare chance to hear unvarnished opinions, and she files away the knowledge for later. Richard notices her growing awareness. Sometimes, when he visits her apartments, he'll test her, gently asking what she thinks of a certain lord's loyalty, or whether she remembers the name of the knight who served in France last year. She answers carefully, aware that the wrong word could travel far in this place. Margaret also warns her about the dangers of becoming too aligned with any one faction. In England, she says, power is never absolute. The king rules, but the lords must be kept close, too close, and they'll choke you. Too far, and they'll rebel. In the evenings, after the great hall quiets, Isabella sits by the fire, in her chamber, letting the warmth soak into her hands as she thinks about these lessons. The flicker of the flames reflects in the polished brass of the andirons, and the shadows seem to whisper back at her. She's still a child, but already she's learning to carry herself like someone who knows she's being watched. This is the slow, invisible training of a queen more than curtsies and Latin prayers. It's the art of listening without seeming to pry, of remembering without keeping notes, of smiling in a way that promises nothing and hides everything. And in the quiet between stitches and conversations, she understands something Margaret hasn't quite said aloud. Peace may be the purpose of her marriage, but in this court, peace is just another word for a temporary truce. The winter of 1399 tastes of iron and unease. The frost on the palace windows etches patterns that look almost like warning signs, and the air inside Westminster feels heavier, as though the walls themselves are listening. You notice it first, in the way conversations cut off when you approach, or how the guards at certain doors glance twice before letting you pass. Richard's visits to Isabella's apartments grow irregular. When he does appear, he's distracted eyes on the river, beyond the windows, fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. The gifts have stopped. No more carved boxes or rare birds. Even Margaret Holland's easy chatter seems strained now, as if she's been told something she's not allowed to share. The truth breaks in pieces. A name overheard in a whisper. Henry Bolingbroke, a rumour that he's landed in England with an army. An anxious glance between two stewards when they think no one's watching. Historians still argue whether Richard underestimated Henry's ambition or simply misjudged his own support. But the effect is the same: loyal nobles are slipping away, and the king's grip on the throne is loosening. One cold evening, Margaret bursts into Isabella's chamber without knocking. Her face is pale, voice urgent. "You must pack only what you can carry. We're leaving tonight." Isabella's first question, "Where?" earns an answer that makes her stomach drop. "The Tower, for your safety. You know the Tower, of London's reputation. It is fortress and palace, yes, but also prison. How often it's been won has always depended on who held the keys. The journey there is unlike any procession Isabella has known. No bright banners, no cheering crowds. Just a small, heavily guarded convoy slipping through dark streets, the litter's curtains drawn tight outside. The city murmurs not the hum of commerce, but the restless sound of people sensing change. When they arrive, Isabella is shown to a suite that feels more like containment than comfort. The windows are barred, guards stand at every entrance. Her French ladies are allowed to remain, but most of her English attendants vanish overnight. The absence presses harder than the cold. Richard comes to see her 2 days later, and the man who enters is not the confident figure from her coronation. His clothes are rumpled, his hair untidy, his eyes carrying the wild edge of someone cornered. Kneeling before her, he speaks with a solemnity that chills the room. "There are those who question my right to rule. I may not be able to protect you as I once could." She asks him directly, "Are you still king?" His answer, "For now," is more dangerous than silence. A quirky note from the chronicles. Some say that during this conversation, a small coal popped from the fireplace, startling both of them, and Richard muttered, "Even the hearth rebels." Whether it happened or not, the image sticks. When he leaves, the corridors feel emptier. You can sense the walls shifting, as if preparing to welcome a new master. Isabella is only 9, but she understands this much. The tide is turning, and she will be carried with it, whether she swims or not. The tide turns fast. You hear it first in the boots, heavier, slower, not the crisp step of Richard's guards, but a new rhythm entirely. One grey morning, those footsteps stop outside Isabella's door, and when it opens, the men who enter are dressed in red rose livery. They step aside for a tall figure with the bearing of a soldier and the watchfulness of a predator. Henry Bolingbroke, now Henry IV, stands in her chamber. He studies her like a man appraising a jewel 4 floors. "Your Grace," he says, and she notices he keeps the title. It's a subtle move, both respect and reminder of what she still is. His voice is formal, but his eyes are calculating. She asks the only question that matters: what has become of the king? Henry's reply is smooth. Richard of Bordeaux is no longer king. He has abdicated in my favour. The word abdicated sits heavy in the air, a polite veil over a blunt truth. Isabella understands enough politics now to know what's unsaid. He was forced. Historians still argue over Henry's intentions that day. Was he considering sending her back to France immediately? Or was he already thinking of her as a living, bargaining chip? What's certain is that her future depends on what advantage he thinks she brings. In the days that follow, Isabella is kept in a kind of gilded captivity. She remains in the Tower, but the sharpness of prison is softened. Good food, warm rooms, her French ladies still in attendance. This isn't kindness for its own sake. It's asset management. One quirky detail survives in a letter from a court observer. Henry supposedly had a chessboard brought to her chambers, not for her to play, she didn't yet know the game, but as a silent message. "Every piece has its role," he told her, "and a wise player knows the value of patience." Isabella adapts quickly. She's courteous to every visitor, careful not to give offense, careful not to speak against the new king. Yet she also refuses to act as anything less than queen. wearing her coronation jewels at formal meals and insisting on the proper forms of address. It's a balancing act, projecting dignity without challenging Henry's claim. Her French ladies remind her daily, "In your father's eyes, you are still Queen of England. Henry may wear the crown, but he has not dissolved your marriage or broken the treaty. That treaty is her thin layer of armor, and she knows it." You can feel the unspoken game between her and Henry, each waiting for the other to make the move that will decide whether she stays a respected guest or becomes an inconvenient hostage. For now, the pieces remain on the board. The game paused. But in a place like this, pauses never last long. The first rumors come in whispers, carried by servants who keep their voices low even in empty corridors. Richard is dead. Some say it happened in captivity at Pontefract Castle. Others murmur about an accident arranged by those loyal to Henry. Days later, confirmation arrives, not in ceremony, but in the sudden absence of his name from prayers at chapel. Isabella is 10 now, and though she never loved Richard as a husband, how could she? His kindness had been a constant. In a strange country, his death severs the last personal tether she had to her life in England. Not long after, Henry's counsellors present her with a proposal dressed up as a gift. She may return to France, but only if she formally recognizes Henry IV as the rightful king and renounces any claim to the English throne as Richard's widow. It's a neat trap, except, and she erases her role in English politics. Refuse, and she risks indefinite confinement. Historians still argue whether Henry genuinely wanted her gone or preferred to keep her as a bargaining chip. The French court is divided too. Some of her advisers urge her to accept and escape the uncertainty of England's shifting politics. Others insist she must hold her ground, remain Richard's queen in name, if not in fact, until France decides how to leverage her position. A quirky note from the chronicles: during this tense period, Isabella reportedly asked her governess to keep a small casket by her bed containing both French and English coins. "So I remember," she said, "which side of the water I'm on, and which side I might be." Weeks pass in stalemate until the decision is pulled from her hands. A message arrives from France, issued during one of her father Charles VI's rare lucid intervals. He demands her immediate return. The wording leaves no doubt any delay will be taken as an insult, perhaps even a provocation for war. Henry's counsel weighs the risk and relents. The terms are left vague enough for both sides to spin the story. In France, she will be received as a queen coming home. In England, she will be described as a child returned out of courtesy, not compulsion. On the morning she departs, the tower's gates open to a grey sky and the smell of rain on stone. Her litter waits, guarded but unbound, the road to the docks stretching ahead. She's leaving behind more than walls, she's leaving a version of herself. The girl who arrived in London speaking halting English and wearing a crown too large for her head. What waits in France is uncertain, but for the first time in years, the tide is carrying her away from English shores. The channel rolls under you, a breathing animal, and when the ship noses into the French coast, the wind smells different, less tar and river mud, more salt and wet stone. It's the summer of 1401, and you step ashore not as a bride arriving, but as a widow returning, though you're only 11, and the word widow still feels like a cloak to sizes too big. Men bow, women curtsy. Someone says bienvenue, ma reine, and you realize how long it's been since anyone greeted you without watching your English minders for permission. Paris rises ahead of you in towers and tiled roofs, but the Louvre of your childhood isn't exactly the home you left. The tapestries are familiar hunts, saints, green forests that never existed, but the air carries a sharper note of anxiety. You pass through corridors where servants pause mid-step to stare, not unkindly, just curious, as if you've returned from the moon with different gravity in your bones. Your French is fluent, of course, but some vowels now tilt in an English way, and when you thank a chamberlain, he blinks as if a sparrow just recited a psalm. A mainstream fact anchors the hall's quiet. Your father, King Charles VI, suffers one of his worst episodes the week you arrive. Doors close softly, voices drop. You're kept in an antechamber, while physicians discuss humours and fumes and bleedings in a tone that tries to sound scientific over the clatter of brass basins. When you are finally led in, the king's gaze slides past you, then back recognition, flickers, then dims. He murmurs of invisible enemies and glass bones. You curtsy as you were taught, and the gesture steadies you like a railing on a staircase. Your mother, Queen Isabeau, is composed in a way that holds the room together. She embraces you, eyes bright with welcome and arithmetic, perfume of orange, blossom, cool hands on your cheeks, and the faintest tremor you wouldn't notice if you hadn't learned to read tremors in other courts. She questions you gently about England customs, councils, who supped where at what table, and you answer carefully, aware that in France, information is both filial duty and statecraft. Historians still argue whether Isabeau is a schemer of cold ambition or a scapegoat made convenient by men who needed one. Either way, she knows the value of what you know. At first, the court can't decide what box to place you in. You are a princess of France, yes, but also the crowned widow of an English king. Some greet you with effusive sympathy. Others tiptoe around you, if you might accidentally summon a longbow battalion with your next sentence, the anti-English faction sniffs for traces of disloyalty, the way a hound noses for fox. You keep your answers bland, your smiles warm, and your English instincts folded small like a handkerchief tucked in a sleeve. Quirky tidbit: the parrot Richard gave you survives the journey, sulking only slightly in its wicker cage. On your second day back, it startles the Queen's almoner by squawking "God save the King." In bright, treasonous English, courtiers freeze. You stroke the bird's green head, and it switches obligingly to nonsense syllables, which, honestly, feels like most politics. The joke spreads in whispers, then dissolves. Laughter is a delicate permission here. Your rooms are reappointed in the French fashion brocade that smells faintly of cedar, a high bed hung with blue silk, a tiled stove that pings as it cools after dusk. The first evenings, you sit with your ladies and recalibrate the little things. The French bow is a touch deeper than the English. The bread here is airier, the wine sweeter, and the gossips faster. London taught you that news walks, Paris reminds you it runs. You begin to reckon it yourself. Lessons resume in a French cadence. Music, scripture, the literature you pretended to understand at 7, and can finally enjoy at 11. A clerk unrolls maps, and you trace coasts you once traced in Westminster, Normandy's jagged hem, Brittany's scallop shell, the tight throat of water between Dover and Calais. Master William in England called it a bridge or a barrier, depending on the weather. Here, a Parisian scholar calls it the narrow that widens and narrows our fortunes. Same sea, different metaphors. You add both to your inner lexicon, but you also relearn the choreography of meals. English tables move in robust rhythms: roast beef, ale, practical plates. French kitchens prefer perfumes of herbs and citrus, sauces that feel like arguments resolved to everyone's satisfaction. When a dish arrives sugared and spiced enough to make your eyes water, you manage a gracious smile and make a mental note. Diplomacy includes dessert, light joke one. You're doing fine. The pressure to declare yourself in heart, if not in law, bubbles up at odd hours. A Burgundian cousin makes a breezy remark about English perfidy while eyeing you for a flinch. A poet dedicates a ballade to France's reclaimed rose, and you smile as if he invented roses. A captain asks too casually how many men the tower can house. You answer with weather and tide tables. Everyone loves a nautical tangent when real numbers would be inconvenient on certain afternoons, when the palace feels like polished glass, beautiful and brittle. You ask your ladies for the old garden privileges. You walk among clipped box hedges where bees stitch the air, and under limes that shed a sweetness you'd forgotten England lacked. Children of minor nobles play at nights, and queens in the alleys. One boy proposes a treaty over candied almonds, and you sign with sticky fingers. The ink smears, childhood does, too, light joke too. Wipe your hands, word filters across the city. Henry IV in England faces uprisings, Percy's bristling in the north. Wales smouldering under Owain Glyndwr. Scotland watching from the teeth of the border. Some voices in Paris grow bolder. If ever there was a time to lean, it's now, others murmur caution. Truces are easy to break and hard to fix, and France has its own fractures to fear. You are asked not formally, never on parchment, whether you think England will split. You say, softly, that countries bend further than anyone expects before they break, and that broken things cut the hand that squeezes them. It sounds wise. It is also a way of saying nothing. Your father emerges briefly from his fog. On a sunlit afternoon he recognizes you, calls you by name, and tells a story about hawking on the Marne when he was young, and the wind did whatever he wanted. He smiles, not the court smile, the real one, and for a breath, you are simply a daughter with a father in the light. The next day, he speaks to ghosts, and the door closes again with the quiet of a book shutting. You learn to keep both days at once. You're invited to a small masque where allegory strutting gilt paper and pasteboard. Peace is dressed in blue, war in red with tin daggers. Marriage enters in white, and everyone applauds as if theatre could bully reality into compliance. You applaud too, because applause is a language that offends no one. Light joke 3. Your hands are getting a workout. All the while, your mother's circle sharpens plans the way a seamstress sharpens needles. Suitors are mentioned only as hypotheticals, each one a name attached to a list of rivers, garrisons, tariffs, romance measured in tonnage. You listen, you nod, and you set a private threshold in your mind. Affection must be weighed alongside advantage. Historians still argue whether you had the luxury to choose. Perhaps not, but you can choose your manner of ascent, and that is its own kind of power. Nights, you kneel at a carved prie-dieu, whispering prayers in both tongues. You ask for mercy for England, the servants, the girls who taught you games, the men who bowed because your crown told them to. You ask for steadiness for France, whose floors tilt under faction and fear. You do not pray for simplicity. Simplicity is a luxury kingdoms rarely afford. You pray instead for a mind like water, clear, reflective, moving when it must, still when it should. By autumn, Paris has decided to accept you not as a failed experiment returned from abroad, but as a woman tempered by 2 courts. You know how to enter a room without causing a draft, how to answer a question by adjusting a glove, how to make silence sound like wisdom. You have come home, yes, but also forward. The child who left at 6 returns at 11 wearing layers no tailor made. Languages, loyalties, lessons that look like lace, until someone pulls a thread. Some nights, when the palace grows quiet and the stove clicks itself to sleep, the parrot mutters nonsense syllables that brush the edges of God save, and then think better of it. You smile in the dark. Saving kings is above a bird's pay, grade, and yours. What you can save perhaps are moments, margins, and the thin seams where 2 worlds meet and choose not to tear. Paris greets her like a prodigal daughter. Crowds line the streets, musicians play, and flowers are strewn along her path. Yet beneath the celebration is something harder to name. She's not the same child who left for England. She's taller, more self-possessed, her French flawless again. But there is an edge to her voice that wasn't there before. At court, her father Charles VI embraces her warmly, though his mind wanders mid-conversation. Her mother, Queen Isabella, is sharper. Kisses are public, her questions private. Did they treat you well? Did they teach you loyalty? Loyalty to whom is left unanswered. The French court wastes no time in folding her back into its intricate web of alliances. Suitors are discussed, none seriously yet. The memory of her as Queen of England adds a layer of prestige to her name, and diplomats know it. Even without a crown, she's a prize. One detail from the chronicles is almost too strange to ignore. Isabella reportedly refused to wear any English-made clothing for months, insisting her gowns be cut from French silks only. England is a chapter closed, she told her seamstress, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Still, her role in the politics between France and England remains unresolved. The peace treaty that had bound her to Richard is in tatters, and England's new king, Henry IV, has no desire to restore it. Yet neither does France want outright war, at least, not yet. Isabella becomes, in effect, a silent envoy. Her presence at court a reminder to England of what was lost, and to France of what might still be gained. She takes to the gardens of the Louvre often, walking in the clipped winter air, thinking of the Thames and the grey skies of London. She wonders, at times, if she will ever see England again, not as a queen, but perhaps as a stranger passing through. For now, she's home, and yet after years in a foreign court the word home feels like a borrowed garment, beautiful, but ill-fitting. She knows enough of politics to understand that her life will never be entirely her own. Queens, even former queens, do not get to choose their endings. The whispers begin in spring, carried through the echoing halls of the Louvre and over the polished tables of council meetings. Charles of Orleans. He is her cousin, young, handsome, and most importantly unmarried. The match makes sense to the politicians. It would keep her within the royal bloodline, strengthen the Orleans branch against the Burgundians, and cement her position in France without the shadow of England hanging over her. For Isabella, the idea is both a relief and a challenge. She has known Charles since childhood, though not well. He was a boy of 13 when she sailed for England, and she remembers him as spirited, with an appetite for music and poetry rather than politics. The proposal is presented formally in the Great Hall, her mother's hand resting lightly on her shoulder as envoys read out the terms. It is nothing like her first marriage, no distant shores, no language to learn, no crown too heavy for her neck. And yet she feels the familiar tightening in her chest. Marriage, again, is not a choice, but an assignment. Still, Charles is different. When they speak privately, he asks her about England, not out of gossip, but with a poet's curiosity. He wants to know how the river smells in winter, whether the bells at Westminster sound like those of Notre Dame. He makes her laugh once, describing his own disastrous attempt to ride a horse while reciting verse. The negotiations stretch over months, not because of any quarrel between them, but because of the tangled politics in Paris. The Burgundians, ever suspicious, question the wisdom of uniting Valois branches more closely. The king, in one of his lucid moments, waves away such concerns, though the next week, during a relapse, he has to be reminded that Isabella is his daughter at all. By autumn, the match is agreed. Chroniclers note that Isabella had her wedding dress sewn from deep blue velvet embroidered with silver stars, a deliberate choice, echoing the colours of both France and her personal emblem. The ceremony is held in Paris, and while it lacks the spectacle of her English coronation, it feels more like a homecoming than a performance. In Charles, she finds a partner willing to treat her as more than a symbol. They share meals in private, read aloud to each other, and speak frankly about the fracturing of France into Burgundian and Armagnac factions. He does not flinch when she tells him of her years in England, nor when she admits that sometimes she dreams in English still. If her first marriage had been a chess move in a game could not see, this one feels, if not entirely hers, at least like a piece she can choose how to play. For a time, life with Charles of Orleans is a quiet counterpoint to the turbulence outside the palace walls. The couple spends their early years together in a rhythm of court duties, poetry readings, and evenings in candlelit chambers, where political guests mingle with musicians. Isabella thrives in this atmosphere. She commissions manuscripts, sponsors painters, and invites scholars to dine with them. Chroniclers later write that her apartments in Paris became a miniature court. Within the court, an enclave where art and diplomacy shared the same table. Children follow quickly. Their firstborn, a daughter, arrives in winter, wrapped in layers of fine linen and lavender-scented wool. The joy is tempered by the ever-present whirring of illness, but Isabella proves a fiercely attentive mother. She's seen walking the gardens, with the child, the nurse trailing behind, as she explains the shapes of the clouds in both French and Latin. Their second child, a son, is born during a tense summer. France is sliding deeper into civil strife between the Burgundians and the Armagnacs. Though Charles' position makes them nominally part of the Armagnac faction, Isabella is careful not to appear openly hostile to either side. She knows too well how quickly fortunes can reverse. And then, in 1407, the stability shatters. Louis of Orleans, Charles' father, and one of the most powerful men in France, is murdered in the streets of Paris. The killing is brazen. Assassins wait in the shadows, strike as his escort passes, and leave his body under a darkened archway. The court explodes into chaos. The Burgundians, led by John the Fearless, admit to the assassination, but frame it as a just act to save France from Louis' influence. The Armagnacs swear vengeance, and the kingdom tips into open civil war. For Isabella, the murder is more than a political earthquake, it is a personal wound. She has seen kings deposed, crowns stolen, treaties broken. But this is the first time the violence has reached so directly into her family. She comforts Charles, who inherits both his father's title and the dangerous weight of his enemy's attention. Amid this turmoil, Isabella gives birth to their third child. But her health begins to fail soon after. The physicians prescribe rest, herbs, and pilgrimages to holy shrines, but nothing restores her former vitality. Some say the strain of politics and childbirth has worn her down. Others whisper of a slow fever that no one can name. Even as her strength wanes, she remains involved in court affairs. She writes letters to allies, counsels Charles on which envoys to trust, and insists that their children be educated with the same breadth she received. A mind, she tells her daughter's tutor, is the only crown that cannot be stolen. It is a philosophy born of experience and one she knows she may not have much time to pass on. By 1409, the signs are undeniable. Isabella's body, once resilient from years of court travel and ceremonial demands, is giving way. She grows pale and easily breathless. The long walks through the palace gardens become short turns around her chambers. Servants speak in hushed voices, their glances heavy with the knowledge that no physician will voice aloud. Charles, now Duke of Orleans, tries to shield her from the strain of politics, but the war between the Armagnacs and Burgundians presses too close. The streets of Paris ring with riots, and rumors of treachery ripple through every feast and council meeting. When Armagnac riders arrive at the gates with urgent news, she can hear their hooves echo in the corridors, a reminder that the fragile peace she once tried to cultivate has collapsed. Her children, 3 in all, become her anchor. She has them brought to her bedchamber in the afternoons, where she reads aloud from psalters and romances, her voice steady even as her hands tremble. The eldest, not yet 6, is already beginning to understand that her mother is different from the other ladies at court. The younger to cling to her, more from instinct than comprehension. In the autumn of that year, Isabella asks Charles for one last journey. She wishes to return to Blois, to the quieter estates away from Paris, where the air smells of pine and the Loire runs wide and silver. He agrees, and the move is arranged with the care of a royal progress, though it is understood that this is no ceremonial tour. At Blois, she seems lighter, if not stronger. She spends hours watching the river from a cushioned chair, dictating letters to old friends and requesting news of scholars she once patronized. She asks for musicians to play in the Great Hall, favoring the old melodies she learned before she ever crossed the Channel to England. But winter comes early. A sudden frost settles over the Loire Valley, and with it, her health falters sharply. The palace physicians take turns at her bedside, offering syrups and whispered prayers. She refuses the heavy draughts meant to dull her senses, preferring clarity even in pain. On the night of December 13, 1409, candlelight flickers across the walls of her chamber as the bells of Blois toll the hour. Charles sits beside her, their hands entwined. She murmurs something part blessing, part farewell before her breath stills. Isabella of Valois dies at the age of 19. The news spreads slowly, borne on winter roads to Paris and beyond. In England, where she once reigned as a child queen, her passing is noted in the royal records with little comment. In France, poets in Charles' circle compose quiet elegies, speaking of her as a bridge between kingdoms in a time of unending war. She leaves behind no grand monuments, no decisive treaties, no victories to be carved into stone, but in the lives of her children, in the manuscripts she commissioned, and in the fragile moments of peace she fought to preserve, her legacy endures quiet, like the turning of the river she loved.